and welcome back to Arcane Adventures Recapped, where we will be recapping the events of the Lorem Ipsum campaign, Chapter 7, Double Deja Vu. Let's jump in. Searching through the wreckage of the crashed airship, Sizik makes a haunting revelation, finding that the only surviving page of the ship's manifest, and seeing both his mother's name, Mara Hopton Lightfoot, and Paloma's mother's name, Pata, as the key deliverers of this package, simply labeled as number 2. Unsure now of their familiar connections to the matter, and now ever the more curious as to what could this now stolen artifact actually be, our party finds it best to return to Straxoris. Once that travel is made and we get some rest, our heroes take a moment to evaluate their leads, noting that the best attempt to learn about the airship would be to travel to Kilauea, searching for Paloma's mother and Sizik's mother. After a bit of uncertainty from Paloma, though, especially because of a deeper fear that she might actually find out something about her family that she does not wish to know, the group does come to the consensus that traveling to Pajakeen in Eperjan within the Kilauean archipelago might be best. Cleo Genorum prepares her teleportation spell when she is briefly interrupted by receiving a sending which disrupts her final casting, teleporting us, but not as a complete group, onto the island of Eperjan. Some of us land headfirst in sand dunes, others splashing into water, and still others skidding across cobbled streets in the city. And between the three of us, 3 groups that is, no sign of Cleo Genorum. Sizik, Ultrix, and Mox Flynn find themselves standing in the midst of the desert. No clue of direction other than the break of dawn and the promise of deadly heat ahead. Meanwhile, Rancor, Paloma, and Owenel find themselves in an oasis in the desert, pulled ashore by a small tribe of villagers. They learn that they're about 22 miles outside of Pajakeen. Owenel is realized to be unconscious after nearly drowning, and matters turn worse when bandits come into the settlement, demanding tribute. Rancor tries to talk them down, but when the bandits don't seem interested in the moral high ground, they threaten Rancor. Paloma steps in with a series of sonic booms and blasts across the village, engaging in a skirmish. Rancor and Paloma together make quick work defending the village and permanently take care of the bandit problem. The villagers, in thanks, offer them a feast, a healing potion, and a cart that would help them make it across the desert to Pajakeen if they planned to leave at dusk. Elsewhere, Pura and Eviden, with no sign of Madame Genorum, stumble into a busy city street, just in time to witness a robbery, and Eviden to meet a similar description of the thief, drawing the attention from the local law enforcement, the Dune Vale. After evading the law, Pura realizes that the inspector, one Artem Jasari, is actually a survivor, like himself, of the tragedy in Aethlun, someone that he once knew. They also learn that, unlike their companions, they did actually arrive in Pajakeen, and find themselves in the Korsuk around the central oasis of the bustling city. Inspector Jasari, doing his job, questions Eviden and Pura separately, to see if their stories align about the intentions and their strange arrival in Pajakeen, still pursuing the robbery from the local shop. Eviden and Pura, however, give vague answers and don't really answer Inspector Jasari's questions, thus getting themselves detained until their friends can arrive and verify their story. But back out in the desert, after walking north for a few hours and then finding a mirage, Sizik, Ultrix, and Mox suffer heat exhaustion, but a sand surfer named Zaris and his trusty sand dolphin, Whistlefin, come to their aid. Paloma and Rancor have a serious conversation about the events that transpired in Hydroxyl Vexen, with Gavivar Theeds, and Rancor admits to Paloma to things that he's never told anyone else about. Back in the desert, though, once on board with Zaris, the 3 desert goers cool off in the combustion siphon, where Mox and Ultrix have a conversation about the trustworthiness of Onyx Miletus, and Mox reveals how Project Akadon began. Also, Sizik and Ultrix have a private conversation. Ultrix is able to help Sizik realize that he's important to this group, and Sizik has another encounter with Stelia that leads him to realizing his magic was never gone, and that his fate is deeply intertwined with that of his companions. Finally in Pajakin, though, after a whole day apart, our party gets rooms in the Nightlight Spire next to the Sultan's palace, which provides beautiful views of the city. After a long, hot day, we finally get some much-needed rest. The next morning, though, we travel to the Zakaran Reach skyport and ask around about the manifest of the downed airship we located in Pickle Pines. To our dismay, though, the harbor masters and attendants had no insights about the voyage, noting they had never seen the Blue Moon symbol, and that trying to track a private voyage from 30 to 40 days ago would be increasingly time-consuming. On our way out, though, we had a chance run-in with Talzir, who gave us some information for a hefty price, noting that he had actually seen Paloma's mother and Sizik's mother now twice, and that they paid him to smuggle the cargo known as Number 2 aboard that airship and through security. Confirmed the route that the ship was going to take, Talzir also revealed that those ladies had heard word from, quote-unquote, the twins, after a long closed case file regarding Akadon, and that someone there was going to start following a lead on Daikia to find Akadon, connecting those dots and stirring concern for the true extent of what we're up against. After collecting their thoughts from the encounter with Talzir Ralbrin, Lorem Ipsum decided to investigate Pata and Mara, Paloma's mother and Sizik's mother, respectively. The party split up, Owenel begrudgingly woken up from his near-death experience, along with Sizik and Ultrix took a stroll around the outer ring of Pashakin, posing as travelers in search of Sizik's lost mother. Their route took them through the eastern sandflow slopes, where sand dolphins and sand surfers gathered, and then to the wind gardens, past the first ship station under construction, and onward through Zakaran Reach to the Skyrise Guild nestled in the southwestern Silk Ring. There, they met an inquisitive gnome who may have actually recognized Sizik's resemblance to a semi-famous builder. Meanwhile, Ultrix spoke with Director Parik Ventalo, the Skyrise Guild's advisor, a renowned pilot, mentor, and mechanic. Meanwhile, Paloma, Rancor, and Evidin searched the Korsuk for leads on Paloma's mother. At Zafari's Safari, an odds and ends shop, Zafari initially mistook Paloma for her mother, addressing her as ambassador, a shocking revelation to everyone. They grabbed stew for lunch at the Bronze Baker before heading to the Sultan's palace to inquire about Pata's ties to the Sultan of Eprajan. But each lead proved frustratingly inconclusive. Most reports placed Pata and Mara leaving for Garai weeks ago. But that's when something strange happened. While walking down a side street, the trio stumbled upon a smooth yet shifting sandstone wall. But before they could react, Evidin was pulled into the wall, followed quickly by Rancor. And without hesitation, Paloma, unleashing a sonic boom, dashed back out to the Korsuk as market stalls toppled over in her wake. She gathered the rest of her companions and led them back to the wall. There, Sizik caught a fleeting vision of an agonized Madame Denorum trapped within it. Acting fast, he dispelled the magic temporarily, freeing Evidin and Rancor, though Denorum remained missing. Evidin sent Crow, the Raven, to summon Mox Flynn, but Crow returned with different news. An airship was docking at the skyport, and disembarking were high-ranking mages led by a figure with a skull for a head. Owenel rushed ahead to buy Ultrix more time as he studied the wall, attempting to stall the mages. But in an anticlimactic encounter, the mages seemed entirely unbothered, until Owenel mentioned Madame Denorum by name. That's when the skeletal figure spoke up and admitted that Madame Denorum was his wife. With little time left, the skeletal mage began marching across the Korsuk towards the party. We decided our next move. Sizik would speak with the incoming mages across the Korsuk, while Ultrix would finish his spell. The others stood ready for whatever would come next. Sizik stepped forth and spoke with the skeletal mage, explaining Lorem Ipsum's connection to Madame Denorum. And to their surprise, the mage revealed that Denorum had been in stasis for years, and the mages were very curious how this ragtag group had managed to free her, so to speak, leaving the party utterly confused about the true past of Madame Denorum herself. Only when Rancor finally asked who they were did the skeleton formally introduce himself as Sigil Caster Trillin of the OTS, and husband of Cleo Denorum. The party was taken into custody for questioning at a secret facility through a teleportation cast, where they explained their connection to Denorum to Chief Sigil Archivist Zoe. They were also questioned about a mysterious blue moon symbol, now more clear that we aren't the only ones interested in this group. But once vetted, they were sent back to Pajakin, more confused than ever, only left to wonder, what just happened? Pulling themselves at the central oasis and Korsuk, the group spots Mox Flynn 100 feet away, and quickly reunites with him and fills him in on recent events, including the strange wizarding group known as the OTS, the mysteries of Madame Denorum and the Wall, and the intelligence they gleaned from Talzir Ralbrun. Wanting privacy, the party returns to the Nightlight Spire after reconnecting with Pyrrha, where they all make plans to depart for Garai at nightfall. Before resting for the group, Lorem Ipsum splits up to make final preparations. Ultrix and Owen will visit the prestigious Arcane Oasis, a renowned magical institute, to investigate whether Pata and Mara might have used teleportation magic rather than departing by boat or airship. However, they quickly learn that teleportation is terribly expensive, leading to a dead end, though Owen does uncover historical details about the now defunct Fenton Lightfoot Construction Company, once based in Mustus, a nation lost after the penultimate. Meanwhile, Paloma and Sizik venture to the eastern sandflow slope to rent sand dolphins for their trek across the desert. Pyrrha, seeking out a shady tavern, instead stumbles upon a hidden entrance to Pajakin's rough and unsupervised undercity. There he spots a familiar tiefling, buys drugs in the infamous Market of Dusk Hour, and visits the notorious bar Mama Scorpion. After some drink, though, Pyrrha returns to the Nightlight Spire to regroup with his companions. Mox Flynn makes plans to investigate the OTS further and attempt to track down Denorum and the wizard Trillin, while the rest of Lorem Ipsum can turn in for sleep in this afternoon, and by nightfall, rested and steady, Lorem Ipsum departs northwest, crossing the desert dunes under moonlight. Amid the long nightly travel and blistering daytime heat, Ultrix and Raylan Vost exchange a sending conversation, full stop, deepening their connection. After 5 arduous days across the Pajaki Desert, the party reaches the Giant Gems, then presses on through the rolling plains to the coastal farm town of Garai. Despite Garai's growth since Paloma and Sizik last saw it, their familiarity amongst the change as they return to the Green Crossing and rediscover their family homes they left behind, altered and improved in some ways, but still unmistakably home. The sound of hammering draws them to Fenton Lightfoot, Sizik's father, who is absolutely shocked to see his son and Paloma again. He warmly welcomes the group, sitting down for tea and conversation, rejoicing at their return. But the reunion quickly turns serious, as Sizik and Paloma have to ask about the crescent moon symbol and the whereabouts of their mothers. But Fenton admits that he's never seen the symbol, and the women had left on a quote-unquote extended girls' vacation several weeks ago. Not long after, Fenton fetches Pavo, Paloma's father, who hurries over, equally astonished at the sudden reunion, but like Fenton, has no further insights, unfortunately. Though the search for answers remains inconclusive, sometimes the journey home is exactly what's needed. Lorem Ipsum plans to depart Garai in the morning, but the afternoon is spent touring the town, and the evening brings a hearty stew, laughter, and heartfelt conversation, a rare moment of rest before our next leg of adventure. And as evening settles over the quiet city of Garai, Rancor performs a delicate ritual using a feather from Pata and a tuft of fur from Mara to divine their whereabouts. Though unable to pinpoint their exact direction or distance, he can confirm unequivocally that they remain on the same plane of existence here on the planet of Ilethia. The real shock, however, comes in the form of 2 chilling aliases. Pata is listed as Asset A-33 and Mara A-99. This revelation lingers as the group begins to retire for the night. Ultrix and Rancor share a private conversation, 2 minds wrestling with the moral weight in the quiet before dawn. Morning arrives, though, with soft sea breeze and a breakfast of fresh fruit salad, lovingly prepared by Pavo and Paloma. A brief letter is pinned for Mox and sent back to Pajakin via the postal system as we ready ourselves for what's next. With a flash of arcane light, we use the portal orb to whisk us away back to Phenorbia and to Athlone, Pyrrha's hometown, raised and reclaimed by nature a few decades ago. Where once stood a peaceful wood elf sanctuary, now lies a choked ruin in thick jungle growth and twisting vines, the stone remnants of buildings swallowed by time. Guided by Pura, we make our way toward the Temple of Star and Moons. But passing through a graveyard at the temple's base, we are ambushed. The vines tremble, then bloom. Massive rosebuds peel open, revealing jagged, serrated petals and gaping maws, a monstrous abomination of a plant. We react fast, but the creature is relentless, a mythic force of nature with no pity for the mortal coil. It drags us to the brink and brings us low. Pura falls. Desperation for survival surges through us, and in a final feat of strength, we cut down the plant before it can claim more of our companions. Rushing to Pura's side, we are too late. At least it seems. But even as grief takes root, an unexpected twist unfolds. All eyes are on Pura when Evidin, silent and unnoticed, slips into death. And Pura draws breath anew, Evidin's private and silent sacrifice, one life for another. And as Owenel stirs from where he was hurled against a tree not moments ago, he rises to survey the blood-strewn, broken battlefield and sees the cost, his sister, Evidin, fallen. Owenel rushes to Evidin's side, gripping his sister tightly as sorrow overtakes him, lifting her into his arms. He staggers back to the group, wordless. Lorem Ipsum stands stunned in silence. Pura, hands trembling, grasping for answers, Owenel carries Evidin into the swamp and begins to prepare her body for burial. Struck by the weight of loss, our heroes struggle to find the will to press on, but Ultrix, Paloma, and Pura push forth into the Temple of Stars and Moons, navigating a mural of Aneris and Elistre, the star and moons, beneath a dome of constellations painted on the ceiling. When Pura locates a hidden switch, ancient magic pulsates the temple to life, retracting the mural to reveal a celestial calendar, a glass circuit, while Rancor and Owenel arrive just in time to notice the concealed compartment, discovering strange magical mechanisms, and a note written in Sylvan. Outside, Ultrix checks on Sizik, still bleeding from one eye. They share a quiet moment before Ultrix is summoned back inside. And within the temple, the group learns that moving a magical stone into specific patterns opens pinholes in the dome overhead, aligning beams of daylight to illuminate the constellations. And recalling a sacred festival once held on Luaxis 21st, Pura offers a clue, and Paloma, skilled in celestial navigation, identifies the correct star pattern. Adjusting the calendar disc, the group aligns the moons to the date, triggering the disc of Aneris to rise and focus a beam of daylight through the temple and out into the swamp. With Sizik rejoining, we follow the light across the marsh, arriving at a second, much older, sunken temple. Inside, we brave its angled halls and waterlogged puzzles, murals of an elven man and a great tree lining the slanted stone. Ultrix and Rancor scout ahead, locating a submerged chamber sealed by a stone on the other side, while Owenel and Pura remain behind to investigate the mural. And what they find is that hidden in a carving of a staff, they find a rotating switch. The stone unseals and the water floods forward, sweeping Ultrix and Rancor into the corridor below. As Sizik returns to the mural chamber, though, he opens up about his pain, and Owenel and Pura offer some heartfelt encouragement. And now Lorem Ipsum pushes further, deeper, into the temple. We pass an ancient statue, and even a dormant stone golem before descending into an underground grove, bathed in impossible moonlight at this depth. But stone wolves silently watch as we find a massive stone case, empty, save for an inscription. When Sizik lets a drop of blood fall on the grass, the ground ripples, and the wolves stir to life. Yet instead of danger, Sizik finds a moment of clarity. Corellon, the wise hunter, an elven patron and fey god, speaks through these stone wolves. Corellon offers insight into the stolen staff, a fallen dragon scale, and the courage to follow one's own heart. But as this conversation closes, Lorem Ipsum exits the temple, finding their own place to rest, grieve, and reflect beneath a still and silent night after a disheartening day. And as Daenerys dips below the remains of Aethlin, Lorem Ipsum prepares for rest, unaware that something strange is stirring in the mist. A dense fog rolls in, silent, thick, unnatural. And as the party drifts off to sleep, dreams take hold. First, they relive their own memories, some joyful, some bitter. But then, something shifts. Thoughts that were not their own now flicker behind their closed eyes. Memories that belonged to someone else begin to unfold. A conscious, swapping dreamscape pulls them from the safety of self and wove them through one another's minds, binding them in a strange but shared experience. By daybreak, the fog had lifted, and mercifully, so had whatever strange thing that had seized us all. Pyrrha quietly slips away from the group, though, visiting a small overgrown grave just outside of the remains of the village, the resting place of his beloved wife and daughter. Alone he knelt, a memory of a life so distant, yet so freshly tender, a love so deep, and a long-lasting sorrow mixed with reminders of hope and sense. Meanwhile, Ultrix ventured through the crumbled buildings of the destroyed village, surveying the devastation to find the bones of a mural long weathered. He could see echoes of his own home in the depiction, and it terrified him. A fear that whatever happened here could very much happen there. And now, with renewed sense of urgency, Ultrix knew he had to return home. After discussing the dreams briefly, Lorem Ipsum set their sights northwest, cutting through the damp and winding wilds of the dotted Thin Marsh, until the sites of Arcane, an archaeological port town, stood before us, heavy with the scent of sea salt and excavation sites of ancient gears from a forgotten age. Passage was secured to Yorthston, and from there, horses carried us inland, through the lumber town of Burn, and eventually to the roadside inn, the cozy cupboard, a quite okay stay. But with continued haste, we pressed forth even still. Their horses stabled for now, they turned north on foot into the Rosal woods. Pines thickened with a waning sense of direction, like traps waiting for careless feet. One such trap, an actual pit, nearly caught them unaware, but it served as a grim reminder to Ultrix that his home was not only hidden, it was guarded. As night fell and campfire lit, Lorem Ipsum settled into rest, and after many days of travel on the road and sea, and then road again, the words ceased between them as they turned in, and the woods were quiet, perhaps too quiet, and they drifted into sleep. A chill settled, something unseen, something watching. An unsettling sense of being watched clings to the edges of the camp. Restless, Pyrrha wanders from the fire in the middle of the night, only to find himself face to face with something absolutely terrifying. Not but 50 feet away, a towering 8-foot figure with glowing red eyes stands motionless. A long, curled finger beckons just out of shadow. Against his better judgment, Pyrrha approaches in fear. The creature, a Wendigo named Zeros, spoke into his mind. They were looking for Ultrix. Pyrrha retreated, rattled, and led Zeros back to the camp. Rousing the others, the party listened as Zeros warned of a threat plaguing Akis, Ultrix's hometown, and asked for Ultrix's help. And with caution and urgency, the group agreed to join the Wendigo, and at dawn, after finding that Owenel and Sizik had magically vanished sometime the day before, beginning a now grueling 3-day trek through the treacherous Rosal woods northward. They navigated traps, sigils, poison darts, and even acid rain before reaching the outskirts of Arcus, just in time for a long overdue family reunion between Ultrix and his mother Deja. But the moment shattered when the arrival of elders Gawain, Yort, and Akarek suddenly now put Ultrix back in a situation he was in almost 2 years ago, declaring him guilty of murder and demanding he undergo the ritual of pacification. Gawain invoked the authority of the forest spirits. Despite Daikia's protest and the pleas of his companions, Ultrix surrendered the maw to Pura and was taken into custody by the elders. While the ritual was prepared, Lorem Ipsum and Zeros devised a plan. Paloma and Pura raced to the Moxicral parsonage and confirmed the safety of Ultrix's siblings under the watchful eye of Ultrix's old friend, Fescor, who gleefully accepted the maw for safekeeping. Meanwhile, Rancor and Zeros trailed Daikia through the village after Ultrix. Within the gathering hall, the city center, Ultrix confronted Elder Gawain and was granted permission to speak with his father Akarek in the chamber of the combustion siphon. And it was there that Ultrix revealed the true killer of Andrew Flock. Not himself, but an Enfridi imprisoned within the siphon who had twisted Ultrix's wishes and slaughtered Sir Andrew Flock. But as Ultrix tried to show his father the creature's truth, the Afridi escaped into Akarek's body. Thinking fast, Ultrix recalibrated the combustion siphon, mid-deception, ripping the genie from his father and sealing it once more. Akarek, shaken but free, returned to the chamber with a new perspective and a confession. He and Ultrix testified before the elders, but Gawain, unconvinced, demanded proof. When Zeros entered, taking on a more humanoid form, they added their voice in support of Ultrix, arguing that unleashing the Afridi again would endanger them all. Faced with growing unity and the weight of reason, Gawain finally relented. Ultrix was absolved. The village breathed a sigh of relief, but not for long. A sudden explosion rocked the southwest side of Arcus, and now, responding to perhaps a catastrophe, and racing towards the Moxicral parsonage, the party found Fescor, the satyr, had apparently tinkered with the maw enough and accidentally fired an incendiary bolt into a pine tree. Ultrix scolded both Pura and Fescor. Still, though, as smoke curled into the forest sky, one truth remained. Ultrix had been spared the ritual, and justice may have finally been set right. 3 days prior, though, while scouting with their companions for a campsite, Owenel and Sizik witnessed a brief flicker of arcane light in the Rosal woods and decided to investigate. What they found was impossible, a freestanding door in the middle of the forest. But curiosity overtook caution, and upon stepping through, they vanished from the material plane, transported to a whimsical, extra-dimensional domain, Riley Ronaldo's traveling tavern and trinket treasure trove. And there, they met Riley Ronaldo himself, a flamboyant, eccentric wizard, merchant, and self-proclaimed entrepreneur extraordinaire. After browsing his magical wares and making a few choice purchases, the pair eventually made their way to the beachfront. Yes, this extra-dimensional place somehow has that. And exited through a shed door that launched them skydiving from 20,000 feet, parachuting directly into the village of Arcus. Convenient, if not for the time dilation that had cost them 3 days while their companions had traversed through the Rosal woods. But the grand re-entry was cut short by the stern inquiry of Elder Gawain, seeking answers about these strange allies that Ultrix has brought back to Arcus. But the conversation was overtaken by urgency, as Dephos, the satyr father of Fescor, arrived with dire news. Outsiders were rapidly approaching the village from the west, and with no time to lose, Lorem Ipsum must spring into action. They rallied what few defenders they could and raced towards the forest edge to meet the threat. A platoon of armored soldiers emerged from the trees, and in mere moments, a tense standoff spiraled into full-scale battle. Though outnumbered, Lorem Ipsum, alongside Daikia, Akarek, Dephos, and Fescor, carved through the first wave with ruthless efficiency. But the second wave hit harder. Skilled lieutenants and towering shield guardians, arcane constructs bound to their masters, surged into the fray. Then, through the chaos, as thunder of hooves heralded a personal reckoning, Owenel and an opposite rider locked eyes, and horror dawned. It was Cyriel, his old friend from school, and in that moment, truths unraveled. These were not agents of Caramira sent to Arcus, but paladins of the Alliance of Revius, not to raid Arcus, but to retrieve the remains of Sir Andrew Rufflock, whose breastplate had been traced to this location. A ceasefire was hesitantly called, and bloodied weapons were lowered, but the damage had already been done. The battlefield, now littered with the wounded and the fallen, fell into stunned silence. Misunderstanding had birthed a tragedy. And now, in the aftermath, with tension thick and uncertainty looming for sure, a difficult choice lies ahead about how to proceed, and many, many questions remain. And in that aftermath of the blood-soaked battle, Owenel and Sizik spoke to Cyriel and his lieutenants while the rest of Lorem Ipsum returned to the Moxicral parsonage, where Daikia finally revealed the truth about her past, how her journey with Akadon began decades ago. She spoke of a miraculously pristine journal she had discovered while researching the ancient civilization of Caldenhai to the south, one that once belonged to the city's High Magus. Alongside Onyx, Mox, and Andrew Rufflock, Daikia pursued evidence connecting Caldenhide to something older and far more powerful, Akadon. Their project, funded by the Union of Fenere, made little headway before being shuttered due to lack of evidence and proof. The others moved on, but Daikia did not. She could not. Her search independently led her north to Blixhaven and into the frostbitten waste, where one day, through the chaos of the eternal blizzard, she glimpsed a spire, only for a second. But she dismissed it as a trick of the storm, and she continued south and ultimately located Arcus, where she met Akarek and gave birth to Ultrix. And then her life changed. Her focus shifted. But then, 2 decades later, Andrew came looking for her, and the journal. After his tragic death, Daikia uncovered what Andrew had learned. That in the archives of the Vicari, buried in Brontero, a mage once returned from the tundra many years ago, and he was driven mad. He retreated to a place called Neverfreeze Spire, and after his disappearance, the eternal blizzard that plagues the frostbitten waste began. Daikia realized it was the same tower she had seen outside of Blixhaven all those years ago, and that what the mage had found was Akadon itself, and that the genie's lamp that Ultrix had discovered proved that the Akadon experiments were real. But all these realizations came at the worst possible time, the night that Ultrix was accused of murder. Daikia helped him escape, hoping he'd survive and someday return with Onyx and Mox to finish what they started. But now she had a starting point. However, convincing Akarek to leave Arcus would not be easy. Still, she asked Lorem Ipsum to join her in finding Akadon, before those with worse intentions could find it first. But, before that, a more immediate and pressing question lingered. What should become of Cyriel and his soldiers to ensure the village's safety? But that decision would have to wait for morning. For now, the party turned their attention to Ozan, suspecting maybe that he had once been involved as a subject of Akadon's experiments, just like the genie inside of Aldrich's combustion siphon had been. But what they discovered was far more dire. Yes, Ozan had been an experiment in Akadon for a time, but not to create the sword, but rather to extract the entity inside of it. But Ozan, or should we say, Emperor Shoni of the Crimson Accord, was an Oni bound within the legendary blade itself. The weapon stirred with sentience, now mistaking Lorem Ipsum for the traitors who had imprisoned it long ago. Drawn into the sword's realm, this party faced the wrath of the Emperor himself, until Rancor, no, until Velmon, pleaded for the Oni to remember. Through pain and desperation, Ozan's memories returned, and the party was cast back into their world. Yet the blade remained quiet, Ozan inert, but still pulsing with faint magic. With wounds both physical and emotional, Lorem Ipsum finally caved to seek rest. Zeros was sent to safeguard the breastplate of Andrew Rufflock, and plans were made to regroup and speak with the elders at dawn. And as night fell over the village, stained by conflict and uncertainty, Ultrix and Fescor sought reprieve at the bath, while the others quietly turned in, their minds heavy with the questions of legacy, power, and the future that loomed just over the horizon. And while matters unfolded at the Moxickeral home, Owenel and Sizik met with Cyriel and his lieutenants amid the tension of the blood-stained aftermath of battle. Cyriel confirmed that Brontero's intentions were not to harm Alcus, but to retrieve the breastplate of Sir Andrew Rufflock, and once now aware of Alcus's location within the Provias territory, to annex the village into the theocratic fold. Yet, even he admitted that such a plan now seemed unfeasible. With the weight of tragedy on his shoulders, Cyriel confessed his dread at returning to Brontero, and explaining how this loss unfolded under his command. Owenel and Sizik, moved by the grief of both sides, offered what comfort they could to the shaken soldiers. And now, seeking further answers, the two headed to the gathering hall, only to find the village elders unreceptive, defensive, and unwilling to allow their involvement. Disheartened, they made their way to the bath, locating Ultrix and Fescor. There, Ultrix shared his plan. The best way to preserve Alcus might be to persuade the paladins to lie, to claim that they found nothing in the Rosal woods, and let the village slip back into secrecy. Or, if that failed, to kill them all. Owenel, not inclined to let people of his from Brontero die, approached Cyriel with the proposal, but it sparked a sharp clash of ideals. Cyriel, disgusted, scorned the idea with fury that Owenel would even suggest deceit as a solution. Tension lingered into the night as Lorem Ipsum regrouped at the Moxickeral home to sleep, unease heavy in the air. Before dawn, Zeros returned with the breastplate, and a final plan was forged. Daikia and Akarek would attempt to sway the village elders into letting Lorem Ipsum, the paladins, and the Moxickeral family leave in peace, while the rest of the party would speak once more with Cyriel. But that meeting went poorly. Ultrix, no longer patient, issued thinly veiled threats, while Owenel tried to de-escalate. When diplomacy failed, Owenel stormed away, leaving Sizik to stand firm in his own wisdom. Quietly, speaking with conviction, Sizik appealed to Cyriel's honor, suggesting that the truest path of the Paladins of Helm was not conquest, but protection. And maybe the best way to protect Alcus was to let it disappear again. And against all odds, Cyriel relented. He and his men gathered the recovered armor and returned or departed for Brontero. Their mission resolved, though not without bitterness. Meanwhile, Daikia and Akarek, ever resourceful, used a gentle dose of gas to persuade the unyielding elders into allowing their departure. And so, with bags packed and choices made, Lorem Ipsum, joined by the Moxickeral family and Zeros, turned their gaze toward the long royal road ahead, to Brontero, and then to Blixhaven, and then to the frozen secrets waiting in the wastelands to the north. That's all for this episode of Arcane Adventures Recount. We'll see you next time as the adventure continues.